The wind came keening off the Tetons that morning, sharp as a whetted blade. Snow fell in hushed, persistent layers, veiling the land in a white so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. Joshua Cady stood on the porch of the ranch house, his breath coiling out in slow, ghostly trails. He'd been awake since before dawn, as was his habit now, when sleep did little but bring old memories crowding back. He hadn't meant to ride out that day. The storm was still building and the cattle were penned, but something in his chest, a tightness, an ache like a pulled muscle in his ribs, had driven him to saddle Ghost, the gray mare, and ride the northern fence line. Maybe he was looking for a reason to keep moving. Maybe he didn't know how else to live. The snow was belly-deep on the lower trails and deeper still where the wind had drifted it. His scarf iced over with his breath. His fingers inside thick gloves were stiff as broom handles. But he rode, leaning into the gusts, checking posts and wire half buried in the white hush. It was past noon when he saw it. At first he thought it was a stump or a log fallen sideways under the weight of snow. But Ghost snorted, ears swiveling forward, and Joshua narrowed his eyes. A strange shape, not wood, not rock. He dismounted carefully, snow crunching loud in the silence, and stepped closer. The shape was half-covered, limp and oddly still. He brushed at it with gloved hands. A sleeve appeared, then a shoulder, cloth soaked through, stiff with frost. A human form, a woman. She lay crumpled on her side, one arm bent beneath her, the other outflung like she'd tried to reach for something in her last moment of waking. Her lips were blue. Her skin, what little he could see of it under the snow-drenched cloak, was death pale. He dropped to his knees, pulled his glove off with his teeth and pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Nothing. Then, yes. A thread of pulse, thready as a cricket's leg beat, but there, still there. Hell, he breathed, voice barely more than wind. He looked around. No tracks but his own, no sign of a wagon or another rider. She'd been here a while. He moved fast. Unbuckled his saddle blanket, rolled her gently onto it. She didn't stir, not even a flinch. Her boots were ragged. The sole of one flapped loose at the toe. He wrapped her as best he could, tied the corners, and slung her across Ghost's back ahead of the saddle. It was a hard ride back. The mare knew urgency, picked her steps carefully through the drifts. Joshua held the woman steady, one arm across her to keep her from slipping. Her weight was strange, too light, like her bones had forgotten how to carry her. The cabin door slammed behind him with a gust. He laid her out by the fire, stripped the wet cloak, the outer layers, worked quick with gentle hands. He didn't let himself think too much about the curve of her collarbone or the way her ribs showed through her shirt. He had no place for that kind of thought, not anymore. He wrapped her in blankets, thick ones, the kind his wife had knit before. He didn't finish that thought either. Water boiled on the stove. He soaked towels and laid them across the woman's limbs, changed them when they cooled. He rubbed her hands between his own, spoke to her without meaning to, low murmurs, simple things, not her name. He didn't know that yet. The fire crackled, time passed, the storm built louder. He worked in silence, listening to the wind batter the windows, feeling the faintest flickers of warmth come back to her skin. And then, just as he was wringing out a fresh cloth, she gasped. It was a sound like breaking ice, sharp and sudden. Her eyes flew open, wild and full of something like terror. She tried to sit, but he caught her shoulders. "Easy," he said, low and steady. "You're safe now, you're at a ranch. You were in the snow." "Can you hear me?" She stared at him, blinking slow, like she was seeing through fog. Her lips moved. No sound came out. "That's all right," he said. "Don't try yet, just breathe." Her mouth closed. She obeyed. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven rhythm. He watched her a long moment. Then, because there was nothing else to do, he got up and poured 2 cups of coffee, one for her if she ever took it, and one for himself. He sat in the chair by the hearth, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't ask what had brought her to that snow-swept ridge alone. Those questions could wait. There was warmth now. There was shelter. There was the quiet crackle of the fire, and the steady hum of 2 lives still holding on. The days after were slow, heavy, with a kind of waiting that made each hour feel longer than the last. Snow kept falling, thick and unrelenting, closing the world down to a white hush. Joshua kept the fire going through the nights, splitting wood in the lean-to with methodical precision, each strike of the axe a punctuation in the silence. She slept mostly, drifted in and out like a tide unsure of itself. Fever caught her once, dry and fast like brushfire. He watched over her then, pressing damp cloths to her brow, whispering words he hadn't said aloud in years. Not prayers exactly, he wasn't sure he believed in the kind that got answered, but things softer than silence, steadier than hope. When the fever broke, she woke properly for the first time. Joshua had just come in from checking the shed, where a ewe had lambed early in the cold. He stepped through the door, arms full of kindling, and found her sitting up, pale and blinking at the fire like it was a memory she hadn't expected to see again. Her voice, when it came, was rough as gravel. "Where?" "You're at my ranch," he said, setting the wood down. "Found you out past the north fence line." She swallowed, nodded. "How long?" "4 days since I brought you in." Her eyes flicked over the room, taking it in. She sat wrapped in a quilt, a fresh one he'd pulled from the cedar chest. Her hair, dark and matted, was pulled back now, braided loosely with trembling hands. There was a small, jagged scar at her temple he hadn't seen before. "I don't remember," she said. Joshua nodded. "Shock'll do that, cold too." She looked at him then, straight on. Her gaze didn't waver. "Why'd you help me?" He shrugged, though the motion felt heavier than it should have. "Seemed the right thing to do." A silence stretched between them, the kind that wasn't empty exactly but full of things unsaid. He walked to the stove, poured a cup of broth he'd kept warm for her. "Drink this." "Slow." She took it in both hands. Her fingers trembled. "Thank you." He only nodded again and turned to tend the fire, giving her space. Later, when she slept again, curled small beneath the quilts, he sat at the table with a scrap of leather he'd been mending. His hands moved without thought, stitching smooth and practiced, but his eyes kept drifting back to her. She hadn't given her name. He hadn't asked. That night, as wind groaned low along the eaves, she stirred in her sleep. He heard her breathing shift, quick, shallow, strained. Then a word, slurred and desperate, torn from her like a wound. "Elias." Joshua sat up straighter, watched her turn her face into the pillow, a tear slipping down her cheek. He didn't wake her. Morning came with a break in the weather. Light filtered through the frost-rimed glass, cold and clean. Joshua found her sitting at the table in his old flannel coat, her legs still unsteady beneath her. She looked small there, smaller than he'd realized. "I don't remember where I was going," she said without looking at him. He stood at the stove, frying salt pork. "No rush. I should feel something about that. But mostly, I just feel tired." He set a plate in front of her. "Eat first, talk later." She picked at the food, but ate enough to put some color in her cheeks. He noticed, though, how her hands lingered near the knife on the table. Not threatening, not quite, just cautious, like a deer still ready to bolt even in the barn. "Snow's let up," he said. "Couple days and the pass might clear." She looked up. "Will you be sending me off then?" He held her gaze. "Only if that's what you want." The way she breathed out, it wasn't relief, not exactly, but something softer than fear. "I don't even know who I am," she said. "I don't know what I want." Joshua nodded. He understood better than she could know. "You can stay," he said, "for now." And with that, a strange quiet settled over the room, not uneasy, just new. He cleared the dishes while she watched the fire. Neither of them spoke. But something had shifted between them, a thread of something not yet trust, not yet understanding, but present all the same. Out the window, the sky stretched pale and wide, the snow still bright under the high sun. It would be days before the road was passable, weeks before any mail came. But for now, there was warmth, there was silence. And in that silence, something had begun. The days stretched quiet as January light, slow-moving and soft at the edges. With the storm past, the world outside stilled, its wind-scoured hollows and ice-bound creek beds held in suspension. In the hush that followed, Joshua found himself marking time not by the calendar tacked above the hearth, but by the small changes in her. She no longer flinched in her sleep. He noticed it first on the 7th morning. She lay curled on the narrow cot he'd pulled into the main room, quilt tangled around her legs, one arm resting loosely across her ribs. Her brow was smooth, no murmured cries, no twisting against some unseen weight, just breath, steady and untroubled, rising with the slow rhythm of someone safe. He brought her a basin of warm water before sunrise. She was already sitting up, hair unbound, its dark strands curling loose around her shoulders. "I remember trees," she said suddenly. "A grove of them, birch maybe, thin, white trunks," someone whistled. He didn't press, just set the basin down and handed her a cloth. That became the rhythm. Each day, a new sliver of memory surfaced, sometimes no more than a name without a face, or the scent of wood smoke on wool, or the feel of reins in gloved hands. Joshua never asked. He just listened, steady as stone. He started giving her chores, small ones at first, sweeping the floor, sorting dried beans. She took to them without complaint, though her movements carried the cautious grace of someone used to looking over her shoulder. Her strength returned gradually, like the slow melt of snow in spring gulches, quiet but sure. One afternoon, she joined him in the barn while he checked the hooves of the new foal born in the cold spell. She knelt beside him without a word, her hands gentle on the colt's flank. When the animal shifted, she didn't startle, just laid her palm flat and murmured something under her breath. Not a name, not a word he knew, but something soft. "You know horses," he said. She hesitated, then nodded once. "I think I do." He watched her a moment longer. "It'll come back, whatever's gone." "Maybe," she said, and rose, brushing straw from her skirt. They spoke little, but she asked things now. What the brand meant on the barn door, how long he'd had the land, if he kept books, if he ever took cattle to the river trail east of the ridge. She never asked about his past, and he never offered. But one night, when the wind rose sudden again and drove a breath of cold smoke down the chimney, he told her something anyway. "My wife was buried last April," he said, unprompted, as he mended a tear in his duster by lamplight. Consumption took her slow, hard. The woman looked at him, her hands still over her lap. "I'm sorry." He nodded once, "Me too." There was a long silence, the kind that didn't feel like distance, just two people sitting with what had shaped them. She stood and poured 2 mugs of hot cider, carried one to him without speaking. He took it. Their fingers brushed. After that, she asked to learn how to saddle a horse again. "Just in case," she said. He taught her over the next week. How to check the cinch, how to read a horse's eye before mounting, how to feel for balance in the stirrup. She rode short loops around the corral, shoulders tense at first, then looser, more natural. One morning she even smiled, quick and startled, like it had escaped before she could stop it. Joshua saw it, didn't speak of it, but it stayed with him the rest of the day. Then came the letter. The snow had eased enough for the post to make it through from Jackson. Joshua rode out to the junction cabin and returned with a sack of supplies and a single envelope, sealed in blue wax. She didn't recognize the handwriting or the name. But when she opened it, hands trembling, lips pressed thin, she paled. "It's from a man named Avery," she said, voice thin. "He says he's looking for his sister, says her name is Mara." Joshua didn't speak right away. "Is that your name?" he asked finally. She stared at the paper like it might burn her. "I don't know," she whispered, "but it feels close." Outside, wind stirred the snow from the eaves in soft bursts. The fire popped in the hearth. Her hand shook as she folded the letter, slower than necessary. He watched her, the way her breath quickened, the way her eyes stayed fixed on the edge of the table. "You don't have to answer it now," he said, "or ever. Not until you're sure." She nodded, but her hands wouldn't still. The name hung between them, Mara, like something fragile, half-remembered and sharp-edged. That night she left her door cracked open. Joshua saw it from his chair, and though he didn't rise, he felt the quiet shift in his chest, the slow give of something long held. The snow fell soft again outside. Not hard, not bitter, just soft, like something beginning. March came hard and gray, the kind of month that couldn't quite remember whether it meant to thaw or to freeze. The snow still clung stubborn in the gullies, but the river had begun to murmur beneath its ice shell, a hushed promise of movement. The days lengthened almost unnoticed, and with each one Mara, if the letter told true, stood a little taller in her skin. Joshua didn't press her to reply. The letter sat folded on the mantel, untouched, its edges curling with heat and time. Sometimes she stared at it like it was a fire she couldn't decide whether to warm her hands by or douse with snow. But she never picked it up again. She took to helping him more, now that her strength was near full. In the mornings, she split kindling, sleeves rolled past her elbows, hair braided tight down her back. In the evenings, she mended shirts, scraped wax from old lanterns, kept the hearth swept. There was a rhythm in it, unspoken and strangely easy, two lives working in tandem, not out of duty, but out of some quiet, mutual understanding. One morning, while Joshua was out checking the southern fence for cougar sign, she rode out after him. It startled him some, seeing her crest the ridge on the black mare with her chin tucked against the wind and a rifle slung awkward over her shoulder. "Cattle were restless," she said when she reached him. "I thought you might want help." He nodded. "You rode clean." I remembered something, riding through tall grass. With someone, a man maybe, there were sunflowers. His eyes searched her face. "You remember how you felt." She hesitated, safe. They didn't speak of it again. But after that, he let her ride out more often. They tracked a coyote together once, its paw prints small and neat in the fresh powder behind the barn. She moved quiet, quick-eyed, her body remembering things her mind hadn't named yet. They didn't shoot it, it was old, probably blind on one side, no threat to anything but chickens, and when it vanished into the trees, she smiled faintly. That night over cornbread and beans, she asked, "Did you love her?" Joshua didn't have to ask who she meant. He sat with the question a moment, then said, "I did, not the way people talk about it in books, but deep, quiet, like a stone under water." Myra looked into her cup. "Sounds like the kind that lasts." It would've if time had allowed. She nodded, and for a while the only sound was the fire. Then she said, so soft it nearly vanished, "I think someone loved me once. I just don't know if it was real." He didn't answer, just leaned back in his chair and looked at her, not pitying, not questioning, just there. Later, she reached for the letter again, turned it over in her hands, didn't open it. But didn't set it back on the mantel, either. Instead, she tucked it into the pocket of her coat. Spring broke all at once the next week. A sudden, wild melt. The river surged up past its banks, carrying broken limbs and the bones of old snow. The mud came thick and rich-smelling, alive with worms and new grass. Birds returned, small and bright as flickering sparks. The world woke up. So did something in Mara. She started humming, low and off-key, while she worked. Cut her hair short one morning, said it was too heavy for trail dust. She asked Joshua to show her how to use the long rifle, not just to hold it, but to hit true. They practiced against pine knots nailed to fence posts. She was steady, fierce-eyed, focused. Then one afternoon she found a pouch tucked in the lining of her saddlebag, the one he'd salvaged from where he found her. It had a name stitched inside, faded thread rough against the leather, not Mara. Lenora, she stared at it for a long while, lips parted just slightly, like she was tasting the name. That evening she sat across from Joshua on the porch, coat drawn around her shoulders, the mountains still snow-capped against the melting sky. "My name's not Mara," she said. He turned his head slowly toward her. "It's Lenora," she said, voice sure now. "I remember now, Lenora Hale." He didn't smile, didn't say anything right away. Just took that name and held it, quiet in the space between them. She looked out at the hills. "I think I left something behind, or maybe I was running, but I don't feel like I have to anymore." Joshua's voice was low. "You could still leave, now that you know." She nodded, "I could." The porch creaked beneath them, the sky softened to lavender. "But I don't want to," she said. He looked at her then, not as a mystery, not as someone broken, just as she was, Lenora. And he saw her fully. The quiet between them wasn't silence now, it was peace. And the river ran on, swollen and bright beneath the stars. The days came warmer now, inching toward May, the land beginning to breathe again. Grass pushed up through thawed soil, stubborn and bright. Crocuses bloomed in stubborn clusters by the well. Every morning brought a new birdsong, sharp and sweet and startling. Joshua watched it all with the quiet steadiness of a man who'd learned to expect nothing but loss, and so found each small beauty a kind of defiance. Lenora began keeping a journal, a battered book she found on a shelf behind the wood stove. Its first pages were blank, the spine cracked and leaning. She wrote in it after chores, sitting on the porch steps with the dog-eared corners resting on her knees. Not pages of memory exactly, but scraps. A word, a shape, the tilt of a sunlit path. Sometimes she sketched, a woman's hands braiding hair, the curve of a horse's flank, a swallow caught mid-flight. She never showed him the pages, but he saw the change in her, a grounding. A growing stillness that wasn't about hiding anymore. One evening, while splitting cedar planks for a new fence, Joshua caught sight of her walking out toward the ridge. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve, and watched as she moved beyond the barn, past the windbreak, her shoulders set with quiet purpose. She didn't return until after dark. When she stepped through the door, she looked windburned and a little wild, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. "There's a grave," she said. Joshua set down his cup. "Where?" "Half a mile past the north fence. Pine markers, old, half-rotted. One of them's carved, says Elias." He met her eyes, "The name you spoke when you were still fevered." She nodded. "I think he was my brother, or someone like that. I don't remember his face. But when I stood there, it felt like standing still after a long run, like something inside me stopped chasing." Joshua said nothing for a long while, just listened to the fire pop and crackle, let the room hold the weight of her words. "I think he died out there," she said finally, voice low, "and I kept walking, I must have, until I couldn't." "You survived," Joshua said. "I don't know why." He took his time before answering. "Maybe because someone had to remember him." She didn't respond right away. Then soft, a whisper, "Or maybe because I needed to find something else, someone else." Joshua looked at her then, really looked. Not the woman half buried in snow, ribs sharp under her skin, eyes wild with frostbit dreams. Not the girl with a false name, eyes clouded with fear. But Lenora, whole, scarred, becoming. The next day they rode out together. She led him to the gravesite, 2 markers, one leaning, one broken clean through. The wind played through the trees like a low breath, steady and mournful. She knelt, touching the earth without speaking. Joshua stood back. Gave her the space that grief required. After a while she rose and turned to him. "I think I'd like to rebuild the markers, give them real stone, something that stays." He nodded. "We'll find the time." They did. Over the next week, they hauled rock from the creek bed, shaped and laid it with care. She carved the names with a chisel and oil lamp for light, her face lit soft by fire glow and resolve. When it was done, they stood there together, hands stained with lichen and dust, hearts a little lighter. Back at the ranch, the lilacs had begun to bloom. Bees moved between the blossoms, drunk with scent. Lenora planted a garden beside the cabin, parsley, sweet mint, and carrots. She sang while she worked now, old tunes she didn't remember learning. And one morning, while they were stringing new wire at the west fence, a horse crested the trail. A bay gelding, sturdy, lathered from hard riding. The man atop wore a duster bleached by sun and saddle. His eyes were the same shade as Lenora. He dismounted slow, tipped his hat. "I'm looking for a woman," he said. "Name's Lenora Hale." She froze. Joshua didn't move, didn't speak. The man stepped forward, gentler now. "My name's Avery. I'm her brother." Lenora stared at him. Her face held nothing, no flicker of memory, no clear recognition. But her eyes filled. She stepped closer, hesitantly, like approaching a deer not sure if it would bolt. Avery didn't reach for her, just stood, open and waiting. Then quietly she said, "I thought you were gone." He nodded, voice thick. "I nearly was." Joshua turned then, walked to the barn without a word, gave them the space they needed. That night the fire burned late. Lenora sat by it with a letter in her hands, one she finally read from beginning to end. Joshua didn't ask what it said. She didn't offer. But before bed she said, "He wants me to come back," said the family, in Oregon now, said they've built something. He nodded, "You'll go." She hesitated. "I don't know," she said. "I need to know if it still fits, if I still fit." He didn't tell her what to do, just nodded again, slow and steady. "You'll know." And outside, spring deepened, unnoticed and inevitable, wrapping the hills in green and promise. The morning she packed her things, the sun came up slow and red over the far ridgeline, casting the valley in gold like honey poured from a jar. A quiet day, windless, the kind of day the world held its breath for. Joshua watched from the porch as she tied her saddlebags. Not much to take, some clothes, her journal, the stone pendant she'd found by Elia's grave. He saw her hands pause once on the strap, then steady again. Avery waited by the gate, hat in hand, horse shifting beneath him. He was a patient man, that much was clear, didn't press, let her move at her own pace. Joshua stepped down from the porch, walked to where she stood. "You'll ride east to the pass," he said. "Stick to the lower trail, less risk of washout." She nodded. "I remember the route now. It came back yesterday." He looked at her then. This woman who'd stepped into his world out of the snow, who'd taken root in his days so quietly he hadn't noticed the shape of his life changing until it had already happened. He cleared his throat. "You ever need." She stepped forward, laid a hand on his chest. "I know." They stood like that, the hush of the morning around them. Her eyes were dry, his were not. "I don't know what I'll find there," she said. "I don't know who I'll be." He nodded. "Then make it yours, whatever you find." She smiled, soft and tired, and full of something deeper than certainty. Then she turned, mounted, and rode out beside her brother, the hooves of their horses muffled by the damp earth, the air sweet with sage and lilac. Joshua watched until the rise took them. Then a moment longer. Days passed. The cabin held quiet again, but not the lonely kind. There was memory in the walls now. Laughter caught in the beams, the ghost of a hum near the hearth. He found her journal one day tucked beneath the cot, left on purpose, not forgotten. He didn't read it, just ran his hand over the cover and set it on the shelf beside the Bible he hadn't opened since Grace died. Spring turned to summer. The fence line held. The garden bloomed, parsley, mint, even a few crooked carrots. He kept it up more out of respect than need. Then in late July a letter came. The handwriting was rough, the ink uneven. No return address, just 2 lines. "I found them. They remembered me, but I remember here too. I'll come when I can." There was no name signed. He folded it once, slid it into the pocket of his coat. Outside, the sky stretched wide and bright. A hawk wheeled overhead. The world had not stopped. Joshua saddled Ghost and rode out along the ridge, the air warm on his skin, the wind stirring up scents of pine and old dust and blooming wildflowers. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He knew now that some people left, and some people returned, and some hearts once thawed never froze again.